Welcome to the Wandering Road Podcast, Creepy Edition. On today's show, I'm joined by my cousin, Kris. Yes, we unfortunately share the same name to discuss our understanding in the paranormal world, along with sharing some personal experiences and how we came about with our understanding with the paranormal. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you on the show.
Well, first and foremost, unfortunately, I am related to the host. He is my second cousin. And as a quick disclaimer to everybody listening, my views, as insane as they might be, are not a reflection on the host or not a reflection on the Wandering Road. So, with that being said, my belief in spirituality and I guess the paranormal comes from really a lifetime, or my lifetime, 34 years of experiences that I've put together in my mind, and an attempt to really understand what had occurred. And I also wanted to understand what other people have experienced. And so I delved a little bit throughout my life into theology, a little bit into modern literature and modern media to sort of piece together a unique understanding of spirituality, perhaps the divine, but for the purposes of this podcast, the spirituality and the paranormal.
Got you. I got to ask you a question, man. When you started your point, you said, you delved into theology and stuff like that. Let me ask you this. Did you always believe in the paranormal, or were you always skeptical? Like, where did that journey start?
Well, for me, that journey started at a really young age. But just to backtrack just a little bit, the journey did start at a very young age, but I didn't understand what was happening to me or to people around me until later on in life. And so my belief set that influences the way that I understand this phenomena is really that we exist in a material world, and alongside the material world is a spiritual world, and this is derived from the Hindu Vedic tradition. The material world is very limited in comparison to the spiritual world, but there are instances, because those worlds exist side by side, there are instances where the barriers weaken or the energy between them weakens. And in those instances, what we notice and we see that, we may understand it as paranormal activity, where the borders between these planes of existence weaken or interact in a unique way. And so, coming back to your question here, when I was very young, I think I saw that phenomena. And I didn't really understand it at that time. But now, through this lens that I currently have, it makes more sense to me.
Okay, I see. So what phenomenon happened? Did you see anything? Because I know when I was younger, I had an incident. I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and it gives me goosebumps till today because I can remember it clear as day. Even though it was like at the middle of the night, I saw these like dwarf things in my room.
Oh, dang.
So like where I grew up, it was a 1-bedroom apartment. And so
Yes.
I had to have been 4 or 5 years old. I woke up at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'm like sitting up in bed and I'm staring at these little dwarf looking creatures. The best thing I could compare them to, they were like the 7 dwarves in size.
Mm-hmm.
And basically I was staring at them and I was yelling at them to get out of here. You don't belong here.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't your house. To the point where I woke up my mom and I looked at my mom for a second, and then I looked back and they were gone. Did you have something of that type of experience in your young age, to begin your understanding of the paranormal?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Yeah. So I was around 10 years old. And just as a preface to anybody who's listening, is that our family, I feel, and I can argue, contains a large number of empaths. and empaths, as the way that I would define them, various family members throughout various generations of our family, are individuals that have a heightened sense of feeling, and they can sense energy around them. Because when we reflect back on the material and spiritual world, if we believe that those boundaries can weaken, or if those boundaries can interact, there are people that can feel that, that can understand that. And so an instance happened to me when I was around 10 years old. And I'll share this freely with our viewers tonight. My parents were having a very bad disagreement one day. We lived together, my parents, myself. I have an older brother and sister, but at that time, they were much older, so that they were more independent. They weren't sort of housebound. So this was really just an experience with me. My parents were having a very large disagreement in the kitchen area, and there was some shouting and some profanities said. And as a young child, you're listening to this, and all you wanted to happen was to stop. And so after about an hour of them fighting, I guess they got tired of fighting, and they went to bed. Now, me being a little kid, I'm listening to all this, but then I walk from my bedroom into the kitchen area. And this is where I feel the borders between the material and the spiritual realm had weakened, in the sense that the kitchen, and honest to God, the kitchen had filled up with very large black flies. And these black flies were collecting around the light sources that were on the ceiling. And we're not talking about 1 or 2 or 5 or 10. We're talking about at least 100 black flies, as if something had died in the ceiling area and black flies were swarming around it. And alongside this phenomenon, I heard a voice, or I felt a presence in my head, and it said that, do not be afraid of this. This is very negative energy. It's feeding off of this energy. It's building off of this energy, or whatever this entity was is feeding on it. You need to leave. And so whatever contacted me, or whatever urged me to leave that kitchen area, I did. And I went back to my room, and I was freaking out. And I guess that was one of the moments in time where I understood that there were things beyond us that I could not explain. And if you'd like, I could go into more detail on what happened after, but that's up to you if you wanted to continue that.
I do have a couple questions.
Sure.
So you said that your parents went to bed. So at this point, you got out of bed, you went to the kitchen by yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and you saw that. Now,
Yes.
Is this okay for the listeners out there? The question I'm about to ask, Rusty was his dog, and we loved him very much. He's no longer with us. Was this pre-Rusty, or was Rusty there at the time?
This was, well, we adopted Rusty, and again, for the listeners, Rusty was a golden retriever we adopted from one of my father's friends that he worked with. Was an older woman who was married to an older gentleman, and they could not keep up with the energy level of a 1-year golden retriever, and so they were either going to have to, I guess, send him to animal services or the pound, or find a good home for him. And so I would be 13 at that time. So this was pre-Rusty.
How old would you say you were, man, when this happened? Around 10 years old? So I noticed a common thing with paranormal things in children, that it kind of like manifests itself to us between the ages like 2 and maybe 11 years old, in which they say kids, now maybe totally butchering this, can actually see into the paranormal realm. Like, for example, my sister, she used to see an imaginary kid at our old place that we used to live in. And apparently that kid was a spirit. No one else could see it, but she was able to see it. So you were around 10 at the time. So after you saw those flies and you heard this thing talking to you, what happened? You went into your room? Did you go to bed? What happened after that, man?
No, there's no way of going to bed after that. So the voice that I felt it in, now that I reflect back on it as I'm much older, it was less of a voice. It's hard to explain, but it was more of an urge and a word of caution. And I guess the way that I could understand it was through a voice in my head. And the voice sounded benevolent, that it wanted to protect me. But when I went back into my room, um, I had understood by that age that a number of our family members were empaths. Even at that age, I understood, and I had heard stories and hearsay from amongst our family members of people who could see spirits or who could interact with the spiritual world. And the first thing that I did after experiencing that was I put my hands over my ears and I curled up in basically the fetal position on the ground, and I asked God or whatever energy that governs this universe, I do not want this gift or this power. You need to take it away from me now. I do not want to interact. I don't want to mingle with those types of energies, whether they're good or bad. I don't want to understand it. Take it away. And then I went to bed after that. Eventually, I was very scared. But then when I woke up, I could say that there were no other major experiences like that that impacted me ever again in a very like in a very physical way.
So let me understand this. So you kind of like asked for this to go away. You kind of willed it away on your own, saying you don't want this gift. You don't want to see this anymore. Let's play a hypothetical here. If you had not done that, do you think you would be able to see spirits? Do you think you would have been able to see into another realm? Because I know based on your faith, we're of two different faiths. Me being a Christian, like I believe in the concept of heaven and hell. It's very straightforward for me. It's like heaven, hell, purgatory. In your faith, there are different levels of existence and planes of existence. Yes. Do you think that's something you would have been able to tap into seeing?
Now that I have to separate a few things. One, those experiences came before my pursuit of a particular faith. So at those moments in times, especially when I was younger, I wouldn't have any kind of theological construct to compare it to. But to answer your question, if let's say I didn't cut myself off from that world, where would I be today? Or how would I interact with that world today? And I think a great example of that is my older brother. My older brother, he has that gift and he embraced it. He is also a Christian by faith, and he has embraced it. And so for an example of that is that he can go into a particular room or a home and he can feel certain things. And it's strange to speak about. And of course, there's plenty of skeptics. And I can give you an example of this. At one point, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind me sharing this. At one point in time, he was looking for a home for himself. He was much younger. There was a point in time in his life where he was looking for a home. He had moved out of my parents' house, and he was looking around for condominiums and little starter home, townhouses. And one of the realtors was walking him through a small condominium. And as soon as he walked into this condominium, he began to feel like the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. And the realtor was guiding him through, and this is something he told me. By the time that he got into the bathroom, he felt an immense weighing on his heart. He didn't necessarily see or interact with anything, but he felt this immense weight on his heart in the bathroom area.
Now, was it like sadness or?
Yes. That's the way that he described it, an immense weight on his heart. And I think that's how an empath would explain it. And so ultimately, he did not choose that condominium. And after doing a little bit of digging around with the local neighbors, he found out that the person that lived in that condominium had passed away in the bathtub.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So to tie it back to what we were talking about just way earlier, between the material and the spiritual realm, if you even take a scientific approach, and Hinduism and the Vedic tradition aligns very closely with modern science. That's something that I personally like. So you have the example the conservation of mass or the conservation of energy, those principles, those theories where energy and matter is neither created nor destroyed, right? It only transforms, it only changes, its properties. And so if a
Right,
human
right.
body is a body of flesh and blood, but also electrical synapses, right? Electrical energy discharges to create movement, to create sentience in a scientific way. Then if the physical body dies in a particular area, then is it so far-fetched to believe that the electrical synapses, the electrical impulses that was a human could remain, and it could represent something that we consider to be paranormal, an energy, a specter of some kind? Could my brother have felt that? That's something that I've always thought about. And Hinduism aligns with that in the sense that we are also a combination of energy and materials to create us, to create a human being on this particular plane of existence in our reincarnation cycles as we try to achieve enlightenment. But that's another story.
Right. To go back to the empath stuff, man, would you say you're an empath yourself?
Yes.
Because for me, I think I might be. And here's why. I like to frequent Civil War battlefields. I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory what happened in those places, right?
Mhm.
One battlefield I like to take a trip out to is the Gettysburg battlefield.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There are some homes that were used as makeshift field hospitals and everything like that. There was one particular home that I took a tour of that, I kid you not, man. As soon as I went into that home and started taking the tour, I couldn't wait to leave. It was so sad and so thick and stifling. It was just a mellow feeling throughout the entire tour.
Well, that's really close to what my brother was feeling.
Yeah, and as soon as I went outside, it felt so different. It felt so different. And I did a crazy thing with my friend Aaron, who you've met before. We decided, and Willie was with us, we decided last October to go, not last October, a couple of Octobers ago, to go to the battlefield after dark. I never felt so uncomfortable in my life. I felt like something was
You done
watching
goofed,
us the
kiddo.
entire time. And I didn't. Dude, I got goosebumps just thinking about this right now. It was one of those things where it's like, okay, am I feeling stuff? Or like, is this stuff making itself known, but I can't see it? Or is it all in my head? Do you know of anyone else aside from your brother that is an empath?
My mom. My mom, even though my mom has not shared with me any real experiences that, I guess are as vivid as the ones that I've shared previously, there have been instances in her life where she had immense feeling for things, immense feeling. Let me rephrase that. She would feel something very particular before a major event would happen. And I don't know if that's premonition, but again, I think that the core theme here is that there is a feeling that cannot be logically explained with science, in regards to being an empath and to, this phenomenon.
Right. It's funny that you mentioned that. I do get
Yeah.
those things sometimes where it's like something feels off. I can't explain what it is. So I can definitely resonate with what your mom has felt and dealt with, because my mom, I don't want to say she's an empath. She's like a mixture of an empath, and she can also see things. And she doesn't like telling us when she's seen things. And
Wow.
for the longest time, I never understood, like, if we were in the back of a cab coming back from home, visiting family or something, and we drive past the cemetery, she, would tell me, don't look over there, don't make eye contact with over there. And I never understood it. When she tells me like what she has seen and all that stuff, it's pretty remarkable. And I know that people that are atheists or don't believe in the paranormal try to find a scientific answer to things, but sometimes science can't answer it.
Well, and here's the thing: is that scientifically, like what you were saying, scientifically, you can't prove if somebody's an empath or not because it's based on feeling. But in regards to the existence of entities and the existence, to tie it back to some earlier thoughts, the existence of entities, the existence of, let's say, ghosts or specters or something, I would say that there is a scientific basis for it based on the law of conservation of energy. If these things, assuming that they are made of energy, some type of energy, if human energy that is expelled from your body and your electrical synapses and your movements is neither created nor destroyed, it only changes form. When the physical body dies, where does the electrical synapses that create your consciousness go? Do they evaporate into just nothingness, or could there be another plane in which they occupy? And scientifically, there's no way to explain that it's completely destroyed. It could change form. It could change and enter a different, I don't know, a different level of existence, a different level of just operating.
Right, a transfer of energy, because like you mentioned before,
Yes.
scientifically, that I guess energy doesn't die. Like there's always
It
just a
doesn't.
transfer of energy. So if our human
Yes.
physical form is a form of energy and we die, would that make the case for an argument like for the soul being a form of energy that then transports itself elsewhere to who knows where, but that makes the case. And going off of that premise, one could make the argument for spirits as well. Like, yeah, I'm just tying this all together in my head, trying to understand, but what gets me is that you will have people that are like very much into their faith and they'll believe in God and the devil and all this stuff. But they'll be like, when you bring up the concept of spirits and hauntings and stuff like that, they'll chuck it out the door like it's superstition. And I've never understood that. What do you make of that?
Sure. So, and this ties into the theology as I explored in a theological sense how they explained these phenomena that I encountered in my life and others have encountered in my life. The most basic thing that I can think of is that the universe, and I think I've told you this before, just in passing, and I think this is a good disclaimer for any faith, is that the universe does not owe you a convenient, comfortable explanation as to why it exists. And what each faith has tried to do is it has tried to encapsulate all the intricacies and the mysteries of the universe, including paranormal phenomenon, into something that is palatable for the human mind and the human ego. And so, if you have a faith, whatever faith that might be, that believes in, let's say, angels and demons and believes in God, but does not believe or does not allow for the existence of something else, it's because that faith arguably has been crafted to encapsulate the limitations of the human mind. It's been crafted to encapsulate the limitations of the human ego. And I'll give you an example. So there are certain faiths that believe that we are the pinnacle of God's creation, that humanity has an intimate connection to the divine, and anything that we do is divinely ordained because we occupy a very unique space in this world and a very unique space with our God. And then there are other faiths that say, hey, you are just one entity of many, many, many different entities that exist in this cosmos. You ain't special, but you are all on the same journey. And the destination might be the same for you and these other entities. But I guess to tie it back to religion, I think that a religion that allows for us to question and allows for us to understand, or allows for us to ponder the universe without ego and without limitation, is a religion that I would particularly favor.
Right, yeah, that completely makes sense from the theological perspective. And again, folks, to anyone listening here today, these are just our opinions, our experiences. We're not providing any empirical data or facts. So this is just a conversation among two guys about the paranormal and spiritual world.
Of course, I gave the disclaimer in the beginning of the show. You're safe, bro.
You know, sometimes you just have to reiterate it in today's world. But I wanted to touch up on, aside from your black flies incident, right? What else have you experienced?
Well, I could say that once that experience happened, and once I made a conscious effort to cut myself off, there was nothing as vivid or as life altering as that. But I have had other experiences, and I'll give you an example. There was a point, I think I was around 15, 16 years old, and one of my aunts that I was very close with on my mother's side of the family had passed away. And I don't know if this could be considered paranormal activity, but this aunt had passed away, and her favorite, and again, this is all you guys could believe it or not, but her favorite bird was the cardinal. She loved cardinals, and she loved red, right? She loved that color. She'd wear that shirt. She was a very vibrant, loving older woman. She passed on when she was around 60 or 70, so not too old, not too young. But ultimately, it's this. About a day after her passing, a red cardinal came and flew to some bushes that were outside of my parents' master bedroom window and sat there for about 4 to 6 hours. And it was a red cardinal, and it just sat there by the window, chirping and just existing for about 4 to 6 hours. And then it left. And my mom saw it, and I saw it. And once my mom saw that, she began to cry. And I didn't think too much of it. I made the connection in my mind, but maybe it's because I cut myself off that I didn't have a strong feeling towards it. But I can make a particular connection just based off of, the experience.
I've heard of stories of people saying loved ones that have passed on and that they would visit them in different bird forms, like their favorite bird and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely onto something there, man. I definitely understand. Now, would you say because you closed yourself off from that, you kind of made yourself semi-immune? Or from that point on, did you make yourself a skeptic? Did you consider yourself to be a skeptic up until, you diving into religion and spirituality? Like if someone would have told you a story about an experience that they had in your teen years, like in your late teens or in your 20s before you got into religion and spirituality, would you have been like, there is a scientific explanation, or, it's just in your mind playing tricks on you or something?
Well, I would 100% agree with them. I would understand and agree with whatever their situation is. And I would agree in the sense that how they feel if the situation was real or authentic. So at that early age, I would still say yes. I would say yes, that I believed in paranormal phenomenon, and I would agree and sympathize with anybody who had experienced that, but I wouldn't have the mental and theological framework to provide an understanding of what had occurred. I could understand that it had occurred, and perhaps I had a mishmash of ideas. Certain family members are Christian, certain family members in my extended family are Jewish. Some of them are Hindu and some of them are Muslim, and they all carry a unique understanding of this phenomena. And so when I was younger, I sort of had a mishmash of ideologies to sort of explain away or to try to provide some understanding for what had occurred. But myself, I wouldn't be able to agree, so to speak, with any one ideology up until, I'd say, the past several years when I started to delve more into the Vedic tradition.
Yeah, that's completely understandable. I was an atheist until maybe I would say 17 years old. And you probably already know this because you stayed in that house as well. But you remember that old house I lived in? Yeah, that one.
Did you put me in the haunted room? How many nights did you put me in the haunted room?
Dude, we stayed in that haunted place together. But yeah, man, like all of these experiences that I had, You know, the knocking on the door, no one's there, the footsteps, the whole nine,
Yeah.
like you name it. I probably dealt with it in some form or fashion, and that's definitely opened up my eyes to religion and spirituality because it made me start thinking like, okay, if this stuff is happening, yeah, I said I was an atheist at the time, but it's not stopping it from happening. So, you know, if one thing exists, then there has to be a counterbalance.
No, I agree. And then the unique phenomenon that you experienced, the knocking on the doors, the footsteps, that also ties into what we were talking about earlier, that perhaps if you believed that the energy of a human being, the residual energy exists even when the corporeal form disappears, that energy can take action. And so it could probably take action or mimic what it had done in the past. So walking up steps or knocking on doors. And that ties into like how you would watch on TV or you'd see on, online or any other source of media, that you'd have ghosts that haunt a particular place, that conduct a particular action, that do particular things, and they don't really move beyond that. You don't see a Civil War ghost, boarding a plane and then flying to another state and then haunting some other guy in a random house. You would see them haunt a particular battlefield or perhaps a medical hall, and I think it's that residual energy that is broken from beyond the spiritual world, and we get a glimpse of it into the material world, and it's just a residue of a person's past life. And we could talk all kinds of things about past lives and lives to come, but that's another story.
Right, right. And you talking about that, bringing up the example of residual hauntings, it made me think of the question of why is it always negative? You know, why is it always negative energy? You ever think about that? Like when we talk about hauntings and like you watch a show, but it's always negative. It's always something negative. You don't see anyone talking about a haunting experience of someone like serving them breakfast or something like that. You know, for a really far-fetched example, like you don't see anything like that. Why do you think that is?
I think I can sort of drum something up in my head. What I think is, we could break this down. There's several things at play here. One, I think negativity sells. So in a purely sense of dollars and cents, if I'm going to create a media story about paranormal activity, I think it's going to capture more people's attention if it has to do with something negative, perhaps like a murder or kidnapping or something sensational in nature.
Right, right.
That I think is for media purposes. But I think that the reason why, again, my opinion, of course, the reason why we don't see a positive haunting, like an old grandma that cooks you an omelet in the morning, is the fact that we wouldn't categorize that as a haunting. So if you walk into a place, and there have been places in my life where you walk into a place and you feel lighter, you feel good, you feel positive energy.
What are some of those places? Can you give us an example?
For some people, it could be places of worship. For some people, it could be places that can induce you into a meditative state. It could be places in nature. Things that can bring positive energy, that generate positive energy in humans and a positive reaction, in the same way that a haunting can generate a negative reaction and fear. These positive places generate positive energy and happiness and thoughtfulness and introspection. We wouldn't consider that to be a haunting, but the energy that's at play is fundamentally the same. Whether it's negative or positive, it's the same energy. We just feel it in a very different way. And we wouldn't associate, like, let's say there was a place of worship that every time you walk through those doors, you felt in your heart the presence of God or gods. Would you consider that to be a haunting, as opposed to you walking into a house and you feel a sense of foreboding and fear because, let's say, you knew somebody passed away there? The energy that you feel, I feel, is the same. Whether it's positive or negative, it's tuned in a different way. We just don't see a lot of positive hauntings because we don't conceptualize them as a haunting.
That is well said. But I do want to ask you a question.
Yes.
When I always tell you, like, I send you YouTube videos about ghosts and stuff like that, and you're like, dude, I don't like anything paranormal or stuff like that. You're like, dude, I live alone. I don't want to see this. I don't want to deal with this. Why is that? Does that, stem from what you experienced as a child?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's a very human reaction that I have. That if I had an understanding as well as I wanted to of the spiritual and material world, then negative stimuli should not have an effect on me. But I think that's just me being a human being, and I was afraid at one point in time, very afraid. And so by seeing those things, it generates that instinctual reaction. I can't explain it. It's not a logical reaction, and I shouldn't have that reaction because I feel that once I am situated in knowledge, I can understand not to be afraid. But I think that's just something that's just particular to me that I haven't been able to get over. So I tried not to immerse myself in things that would generate negative thoughts about paranormal activity, only because my fallible human brain can take those things and run with it. And when I live alone, any sound will freak me out. So
Right, that's completely understandable. And I'm the complete opposite. As you know, I like to delve into the paranormal. I like to listen to shows, watch shows, podcasts, anything paranormal. I tend to soak it up. You and I, as you know, we both went through academia. We both went through grad school twice. We both have history degrees. And the one thing with history degrees, it teaches you to research to understand, get to the main points, to understand why a certain thing happened, the way that it happened, and how things have turned out after that. And with all the paranormal stuff, trying to understand, like, where does this all come from? Because like you said, different faiths have different beliefs. When it comes to the paranormal, some of them outright shun them. For example, like in Islam, they just, blame everything on the jinn. So, try to get an understanding of what is this paranormal world. Is it paranormal, or is it another dimension that we can't see?
Well, and I think that's one of the biggest questions that I asked myself as I've gotten older and I wanted to pursue a faith. I wanted to sort of pursue a faith and align myself with a belief set so that, excuse me, so that my future family would, however shape that takes place, would also be guided, at least in part, by that belief set. And so, like the example you gave, if every paranormal phenomenon can be explained by jinn and just stay away from jinn, I think that is just a particular instance where the theology is being made palpable for human understanding. That things that we don't know, they're bad. Just stay away from them because we don't understand. We don't conceptualize what they truly are. And that's something, and again, I'm not trying to push a particular position or a particular belief set, but it's just what I personally believe. And so when I was looking for answers for those questions, I gravitated closest to the Hindu tradition, the Sanatan Dharma traditions. It's because they have an explanation for that, and that explanation they have crafted 5,000 years ago. So their basic explanation is that humanity as an entity, as a spirit, going through cycles of life and death and rebirth are just one of a multitude of spiritual entities that exist in this universe. And humans live on a particular loka, which is a particular plane of existence or material existence. And there are entities that perhaps in some religions may call them angels. There are some entities that exist at higher energy levels, higher vibrational energy levels than us, and can do miraculous things. In the Hindu tradition, in some traditions, they're called the devas and the devatas. And then there are entities that are not necessarily bad or evil, but exist on a lower energy plane than us in their reincarnation cycles. And those are called the asuras. And there's also, I think they're called rakshasas, which are demonic or more malevolent entities. And there's also natural entities. But Hinduism has an explanation for the existence of the paranormal, and it's ingrained into their understanding of the universe. And in their understanding of the universe, you are but a speck of infinite created galaxies, in infinite ways to live, in infinite ways to understand our relationship with each other and the spiritual world. And it's extremely humbling because it gives me something to look forward to. And it doesn't hold my hand. It doesn't give me a comfortable perception of the universe or of these beings. Some of them are very scary, as you know already. Some of them are frightening in nature and in power, but they exist. And it's not the universe's obligation to make them safe or to make them friendly to you. I think it's your obligation to become knowledgeable of all of these entities. And so at this point in my life, I use that framework to try to understand this phenomena that we've experienced in life.
So would you say it's more of an understanding of how things are laid out that's the attractive part, as opposed to you thinking, well, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. Is that why? Is it like, do you believe that they're right? Or does it come from that their concepts allow for, I would say, better understanding, as opposed to another scripture or text telling you it is what it is, whereas your Vedic beliefs are, well, like this exists here, it's all energy transfer, etc., etc.
Well, I think you touched upon a few critical points. Is that the Vedic tradition thus far in my life has allowed me to ask the most questions without coming across as being critical or being perhaps heretical of the tradition. There are certain beliefs that exist in the world that if you start to question the theology, you are seen as heretical, that you are not supposed to question orthodoxy because that's the way it is. In the Vedic tradition, you question everything. Now, it's not to say that there won't be people that take offense to it. Of course, there will be. But the Vedic tradition is situated in knowledge. And so around 5,000 years ago, roughly, depending on who you ask, when you look at the Vedas, in some instances, it's a series of questions. And so, for example, in the Vedic, one of the earliest Vedas, it's a synopsis on human geography. And human geography, and this is 3,000 BC, roughly, right? The name of the geographic chapter is Bhugol, which means round earth, which means in 3000 BC, these guys understood that the world was round. If you go back into other histories throughout the world, they quote unquote understood the world was flat, or they understood that the sun revolved around the earth, or that they understood that everything, the cosmos, revolved around the earth. This Hinduism has been a series of questions that have been asked about the intricacies of the universe. And you don't have to accept the answers that they give you, but you can ask those same questions. And if those answers give you fulfillment, then I would say agree with them. So, in summation, my belief set is tied to them allowing me to question and be critical of the tradition, and to question and to be critical about the universe and the world that I live in.
So you did mention a few times the age of the religion, has existed for 5, 3, 4,000 years. Let's say, for example, this faith came out about 50 years ago or 100 years ago. Would you have the same confidence in what they're saying? Or does age play a role into it?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. And I think that is an expression of me being a history major. And I have tried my best to understand the creation, the movement, and the understanding of societies, of human movement and society as a whole, as we moved from settled or as we moved from hunter gatherers to settled societies to what you consider to be quote unquote civilization. And I think humanity has constantly evolved through the passage of time, and there's really no other way to explain it. And I think that a religion that has stood the criticism, the critique, and the the developments of human society over such spans of time, and still to this day has not only withstood criticism, but is still the dominant religion, one of the dominant religions, sorry, on planet Earth, I think is a testament to the knowledge that it brings. And if this belief set came about 50 years ago, my first question I would have for it is that where did they get these ideas from? Because as a history major, as you and I know, that there's nothing new under the sun. A lot of these ideas have been cycled again and again and again and transformed and redone for particular audiences at particular times in human history. If a document or if a religion came about 50 years ago that had the same belief set, same core ideologies, as a history major and as somebody who's questioning and critical of the world, as I said I would first question and try to understand where did they get these ideas from. And so when I look at Hinduism and I look at its wide, I guess its collection of knowledge and secrets and understanding, one page has led to another that has pushed me back into time. So there have been developments in Hindu theology that happened within the last 50 to 100 years. I would say arguably there was an offshoot of the Hindu tradition known as the Arya Samaj that came about, I believe, in the 1840s or 1850s because of a new set of understanding a new way of understanding the Vedas. But their belief stems from something that came earlier, and then that belief stems from something that came before. And you follow that trail as a historian to its roots. And so I hope that answers your question, because I would take the same approach to that religion that's 50 years old as I do with a religion that is 5,000 years old.
Yeah, that definitely did answer my question, because the only reason I asked that question is because some people find validity in the age of certain things. So because something is extremely old, it's automatically assumed to be correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's the only reason I asked that question, to get a better understanding of, is it more so the age that appeals to you, or was it the actual, the discussion and the text itself? But I think you answered that question well.
I can expound upon that just a little bit, that ultimately, even if a religion was 20,000 years old or 50,000 years old, right? And I'm sure humanity in its modern Homo sapien form had come about, according to modern theory, about roughly 100,000 years ago. There have been probably infinite.
They found evidence that it's longer than that.
That's even better. So let's say it's 200,000-300,000 years ago, however many 100,000 years, right? The modern human takes center stage in the world, right? Imagine there's been innumerable belief sets that have existed prior to Hinduism that had governed human belief. But one thing why I gravitated towards it is because if a religion did not satisfy the theological needs of its constituents, it would fade away. If a religion can satisfy the theological needs of its constituents, it will endure in some way, shape, or form. And I'll give you an example. So throughout and again, this is just a historical analysis. There's a general understanding that when you look at periods of colonialism, whether it's through the Europeans, whether it's through the Middle East, there was a period of expansion in the Middle East from the onset of Islam into the present day. We talk about European colonialism and other colonial endeavors, other imperialist endeavors. Usually what ends up happening is that the imperial country will then take over a country, and it either obliterates or it gets rid of or it fundamentally changes the native religion of the place that it invades. And I think it ties back to my idea that
Right.
if the religion cannot service its people in a meaningful way that perhaps another religion can, then it will not endure. But the British invade India, the Muslims invade India, the Persians have invaded India, the Greeks have invaded India, the Mongols have invaded India, I believe. The Mughal Empire invades India. All of these groups have unique beliefs that have attempted to impose their unique belief sets upon the native religions of India. However, Hinduism has endured, and it has endured in spite of invasion of all these different faiths, of all these different peoples. And I would argue that not only is it old, right, it is, but it has satisfied the theological needs of its constituents, of the people, and thus it endures. And so that is something that I gravitate to, that despite these other alternatives that exist in the world, there are still over 1 billion adherents to this particular faith because people find fulfillment in it and they're satisfied with the answers that it provides. So it's not just age. I think it's the ability to endure and to continue to endure into the future.
Yeah, man, those are some really great points. And that answer that you gave, that sums it up perfectly. Like, I couldn't have summed it up better myself.
Yeah.
Like, if the religion has a purpose, if it serves a purpose, and it adheres to the needs of the people, it will endure for 100 years, 2,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000. It'll endure.
Because you got to look. There have been innumerable local religions that have existed prior to Hinduism, prior to Christianity, prior to Judaism, prior to Islam, that fulfilled the needs of the local population as it existed in its own capacity. But when another religious belief had arisen or had been imposed or had challenged that theology had fallen away because the other religion either offered answers, had more people following it. Other circumstances take place, of course. But when people have belief, it's very hard, I think, to change belief by force. And so you can continue to try to change belief in a physical sense, like how the British did in India, like how the Mughal Empire did in India. You could physically invade land. You can impose laws that stop you from practicing rituals. You can impose laws that stop you from learning the ancient language. You can impose tariffs on particular practices. So you can be very physical in your approach to stamping out a religion. But if the core belief set of that religion is more advanced or is more fulfilling than the ideas that you bring, that religion is going to endure. And I think that that's why Hinduism has endured as long as it does, because it offers a number of answers that perhaps other religions cannot explain or are not as articulate in their explanation.
It goes off the notion that you can kill people, but you can't kill their ideology. The ideology, if it's strong in its foundation, it will always endure. So yeah, that is a good point to bring up, because we even see that, not to get political or go off track from the paranormal, but we do see that happening even today. Like, people are killed for their beliefs, and it made the perpetrators of this think that it's okay. Just because we kill the people, that means, the people, everyone else will stop believing.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's not the case. If only anything, you'll strengthen their resolve.
Correct. And so if a belief set, and again, this is just my opinion, if a belief set comes in with a greater explanation for the answers, for the questions that the people ask, the people will gravitate to it. And it doesn't matter how old your religion is. Your religion can be 50,000 years old. But if it doesn't have the answers that the people are seeking, then people are going to look elsewhere. And so it's not purely because of age, but I think it's, in my instance, that it's been able to endure civilizational wide collapses in not collapses, but civilizational wide invasions from other ideas, from other peoples, and yet it is still arguably the third largest religion on planet Earth.
Right. And there's one thing I've thoroughly enjoyed during this conversation we've been having for the past hour.
Mhm.
I, at one point, forgot we were running a podcast here. Folks, this is pretty much what him and I talk about. We talk about this stuff pretty much every day on a daily
Unfortunately,
basis,
I can't
different
escape
things
you.
like this,
You
unfortunately.
are like my karmic debt or something, my karmic consequence. There's a reason why you are just always here in my life, and I don't. And you're also named what I'm named, which is absolutely bonkers. So I don't know about that.
It's comical. You did something in your Vedic stuff that got you stuck with me for this lifetime. Yeah, we just got tossed into a room together, and our dads gave us a box of 20-piece chicken nuggets and video
Like,
games.
don't kill
And it was
each
like,
other.
here you go. Yep.
I'm sure I've known your spirit before. There's always a rhyme and reason to these things. Either we in a previous life we've known each other, or perhaps you know what? It would be some crazy karmic stuff, and then in a previous life we were mortal enemies. And then gods or the energy wanted to troll us to heck and back and put us together as close cousins. And then they're like,
To teach us a lesson. Well, if we refer back to what you said, which you're with the Hinduism and the Vedic texts and their beliefs and the whole concept of these different planes of existence, yeah, that is not out of the realm of possibility. And not to get off track here, but there have been some shows that I have listened to on Coast to Coast, like with Art Bell, and there's a new host now. Art Bell passed away, may God rest his soul. They talk about the whole concept of soulmates and stuff like that, and how people have interacted in the past. Sometimes they were relatives, sometimes they were mortal enemies. It's an interesting concept. There's quite a few shows that you could find on YouTube. If you look up soulmates and Coast to Coast, you'd be able to find that. But I'll digress from that before we go off on a 2-hour tangent about reincarnation and everything like that. But I wanted to ask you before we wrap up today's show, is looping all of this together back to the concept that we were trying to get to in the beginning
easily
at the start of the show. With the paranormal world and your religious background and your beliefs and the way that you understand things from the perspective of a Hindu, right? What is your understanding of the paranormal? Do you fear it, or are you kind of like, well, this is something beyond my understanding, that there's good and there's bad?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. And Hinduism, in my brief foray into the texts, into the theology, it allows for the existence of the paranormal. So that's the basics. We exist on a particular plane, and there we exist in the material world, which, depending on the scripture you read, is about 1/3 to 1/4 of the entirety of our visible universe, which leaves 3/4 of our visible universe to be made of energy, to be made of what they considered and then to be spirit. And so Hinduism allows for the existence of spirit. It is the predominant form of energy that pervades the galaxy. We are not the predominant form. It's the spirit and the energies that exist at that realm. And so humans live on a particular loka, a particular plane of existence. And in their reincarnation cycles, it is very well possible for a flesh and blood human, after achieving their dharma or their duty and the lessons that they've learned in a particular life, to be reincarnated into one of these higher beings that may be considered something that's made of energy, that we might see as a ghost, or we might see as a specter, or we might see as something that is paranormal. It's because they exist on a different plane than us. Sometimes that energy frequency is positive. So in the most traditional of understanding, the devas, the various manifestation of God or gods that come down to visit humans and interact with humans in a spiritual way, are basically energy manifestations in particular forms. Also, things that are malevolent, things that are bad, that we would consider in a human perspective to be bad, are also energy manifestations on lower planes of existence. They would be considered the asuras. They're not always evil in their intent, but in a lot of the scripture, they play that moral role. And so we exist in a place that's in the middle. And so Hinduism has provided an explanation for that. And it allows me to situate myself in a greater sense in knowledge.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of The Wandering Road. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and share with your friends. I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to you joining me for the next one.